Welcome to Success Redefined with Dr. Tony Warner. I'm Dr. Tony, mom of 5, psychotherapist, author, and mentor. Here, you're going to find insightful discussions spanning science, psychology, and soul as the personal and professional meet, and we explore the intersection of what really matters. So success can be redefined with connection, healing, and fulfillment in mind. I'm joined by Michelle Sacksteder to have an open conversation about navigating neurodivergence as a parent, navigating neurodivergence when you are a parent doing the parenting of a child that's experiencing neurodivergence, as well as how all of this intersects with mental health, societal health, and on top of that, how we handle it when we are a perfectionistic type of person, parent, or professional. Michelle is a parenting coach and workshop educator who supports families with navigating neurodivergence from an affirming lens. She is a neurodivergent parent herself. She supports parents who want to parent differently than how they were parented, but they don't really know how to do that or they don't know where to begin. She uses her education in the field of counseling to explore generational and developmental trauma wounds, inner child and shadow work, and uses techniques like Brainspotting in her work as well as she does parent coaching. Let's go ahead. Let's jump into this conversation. It's got some language in it that is therapy oriented. So I'll be sharing some links in the show notes that provide more resources if you're interested in exploring some of those aspects of the conversation in more depth. Hello, everyone. I am so glad to be here today. I've been looking forward to this conversation a lot because our guest today is someone that I actually haven't spoken to yet in person, in virtual person. We got to go back and forth through the vetting process and setting this up. And she just had so much to share that brought a lot of curiosities up for me, but also a lot of things that I'm interested in, like brain spotting and parenting and things like that. And a lot of folks that are tuning in might not know what brain spotting is. So I thought this would be a great opportunity for us to bring that into the conversation too. So Michelle, thank you so much for saying yes and being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great. Great to be here.
Yes. Okay, Michelle, before we dive into our conversation today around parenting, around neurodivergence, whether we're navigating neurodivergence as parents or we're navigating supporting our children that are neurodivergent, and then also healing and brain spotting and marrying all that together. So before we dive into all of that, can you just tell us a little bit about where you're from, what you're up to nowadays, a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I spent 12 years in education. I was in Montessori, Waldorf preschools, and then transitioned into public school education. I did 4 years as a gifted specialist in my local school district, and that's really when I started to become obsessed with pediatric brain development. And I just wanted to know how to support these kids with their brains and learn all the things. And so I went down some pretty big rabbit holes, and which led me really into the rabbit hole of neurodivergence, which opened up my eyes to the neurodivergence within myself and my family. So I started supporting families with these workshops in the evenings at the public schools. And I really recognized this huge need for just the psychoeducation, the education around what is developmentally normal, how can I support my kids when they're struggling with these different things. And the workshops really took off. And so as I continued to build up myself as a support person for these families, I recognized that I could no longer do that and also teach full time. So I transitioned into private parent coaching about a year and a half ago. And so now I just support parents one-on-one. And then I'm also a clinical graduate intern where I do the brain spotting and the counseling as well. So I'm kind of getting to merge those two interests together right now, which has been a lot of fun.
That sounds like a unique personal and professional path of venturing the realm of neurodivergence, which I think can feel really broad. Can you define what your definition of neurodivergence is. So when you say, a parent that's neurodivergent or a child that's neurodivergent, what that means, what you mean by that?
Yeah, so anything that diverges from neurotypical. So most of our societal structures are built upon a neurotypical brain type. And so anything that diverges from that could cause disability because our brains are not necessarily developed with those societal structures in mind. So if an individual is experiencing a disability because they don't have that level playing field, then that neurodivergence is causing an impact and could benefit from potentially getting some support. So that has been the primary focus of my parent coaching. I utilize the polyvagal theory a lot. That is, I really take a nervous system lens to supporting neurodivergence because it is the nervous system that is most often activated. When we're living in a society that wasn't built for us, we don't have that felt safety. And without that felt safety, then we end up having chronic dysregulation. And so by taking the polyvagal lens and working with the vagus nerve, I can support families by just supporting more regulation, more resilience, more flexibility, more problem solving and collaboration as a family.
What did that look like for you? Because you said along your journey, you started to open up this awareness of neurodivergence within yourself and within your family. So how did you start to notice or become aware that there was neurodivergence happening for you as an individual?
Yeah, well, a part of that was my son's development. As my kids were growing up, I started to recognize more and more of the divergence within my family. And so not to speak to them about too personally, but just to it started to come into my awareness. And it also came into my awareness that I couldn't find good support for myself. I was trying to navigate learning that I was neurodivergent, that my kids were neurodivergent, and then find those supports that felt good to me. And I really struggled to find things that felt affirming and supportive in my society. So as I continued on with my journey, it really became in the beginning, it was mostly about how can I help myself and my family. And then it kind of evolved from there. Unfortunately, again, with the societal structures for neurodivergence, the primary of care is applied behavioral analysis. And that wasn't something that I was interested in. And so I tried to find alternative measures or support strategies. And not only were they not covered by insurance, they were incredibly expensive and they were not easily accessible.
Yeah. Yeah. Can we break down into some practical terms someone's listening in right now and they're like, but how do I know I'm neurodivergent? Because folks perhaps like you and I, who, you correct me if I'm wrong. So I'll just speak for myself. I would say that I generally fit in the category of a high achieving woman. And so I never really fit in any average, like typical categorical box
Mhm.
at all. Like it just didn't. Right. And so for me, it's like, well, I'm just like totally divergent, right? I think that can be just hard to grasp. It just feels so big and broad and confusing. So what are some practical things someone could notice or look out for, or what are some things that you noticed that helped you realize, oh, well, maybe this is the umbrella that I fall under. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm pretty non-pathologizing, and so I really I think, and for what that means to me is like, what is helpful to you? Because if exploring neurodivergence within yourself or your child, you start to learn and read things that maybe feel right for you, then like keep exploring that. If it's helpful, if it's making you feel validated, if it's helping you connect to the community, if I'm all for self-identification if it gives you what you need. I for myself, there were things along the way that I can look back on now and was like, yeah, that probably could have used some support because I'm also a really high achieving woman. And I didn't have I feel like that is especially true with women, where that's kind of overlooked, because we tend to develop so many strategies for accommodating all the people around us and even accommodating ourselves. And it's easier for, I think, society to kind of take a blind eye when you're doing well at work or you're doing well at school. For me, I was great at school, straight A student, teacher pet, I really people pleaser. But then by the time I turned 16, I was so burnt out. I ended up dropping out of school. I dropped out of high school in my junior year, and I was exhausted. I had nothing left to give. School was no longer interesting for me. I didn't care about learning, and it took me a long time to go back to college because I just had been so turned off by the academic system, which was really disappointing for me, who had loved learning my whole life.
Would you say then that for the purposes of this discussion, that when we talk about neurodivergence, we're speaking to folks like you and I who just don't generally feel like they fit into the typical boxes that society tends to have created?
If that's helpful for you. I go back to each person as their own unique individual. And if exploring these things because you feel like there's something inside of you, there's a part of inside of you that just doesn't really feel like there's a place for you. And if you start to explore neurodivergence and all of a sudden that fills that void, cool, run with it. But if you don't need that, then you don't have to do that either. I don't want anybody to feel like they have to go and categorize themselves or have a label or a diagnosis when that's not a need that they have. So everybody just, I feel like it's more important that everybody just kind of analyze their own place in that.
Yeah, I agree. We don't want to pathologize or over-categorize because that can be counterproductive. And also, I think for our conversation, we want to be clear about what we're talking about, right? So folks know what we're talking about. My understanding is, for the purposes of this conversation, when we're talking about neurodivergence, then we're speaking to those who may feel that they just don't fit into the typical boxes. And that's also just a very broad definition too, which may not be enough to help someone understand exactly. But would you add to that to provide some context for this conversation?
Well, it could also be the level of societal impact that it's having on you. If you have sensory issues that are such a huge impact on your life that it's impeding academics, or it's impeding relationships, or it's impeding work, if you're having to mask because you need to fit into a societal structure that wasn't made for you, and you're exhausted all the time by having to constantly shut down your own internal needs, then yeah, like that might be a good area to go explore so that you can not feel like you're broken, not feel like something's wrong with you, and maybe have a community of support, even if it's just an online support where you have that normalized for you a little bit.
Yeah. So having to mask, you said having to mask because of a social structure or system that you feel like you don't fit into and it's exhausting you. Is that an experience that you have had?
Oh yeah, that played a huge role in my burnout of dropping out of high school. All of the years of ignoring my own needs for the needs of others or making others more comfortable, it absolutely masking absolutely contributed to my burnout.
I think masking speaks directly to the focus of this podcast around redefining success, because why else would we mask?
Yeah.
Right? Outside of success and safety, and you mentioned safety earlier, polyvagal theory can be a theory that can be confusing and challenging to grapple for anyone, therapist or otherwise. So I would say I like that you focus in on the safety component because I think we can all understand that we all want to feel safe, right? And if we don't feel safe, that affects us. How would you would you say that there's a connection for you with this having to mask and then what your definition of success used to be, how you used to pursue or define success for yourself as a neurodivergent individual who's also an ambitious woman?
Yeah, absolutely. That is essentially why I started my business with parent coaching, because I was lucky enough to have a spouse who could support our income temporarily while I was able to go start something new, and I felt something in my gut, and rather than sticking with the status quo and continuing in my safe job, I felt this need to go and try this. And so I one of the best parts of it has been that I have gotten to show up as authentically me. And day in and day out with all of my clients, I get to show up as who I am. And that's not ever something I've been able to experience before.
Mm.
So I get to align my business with my integrity and my values, and create systems that work for me and my brain, and not have to follow any sort of rigid protocol that was assigned by a corporation. And that has worked immensely well for me.
So the way that you are pursuing and defining success for yourself in your business, it sounds like it's different now than it was before.
Yeah, it's unmasked, essentially. Yeah, my business is me unmasked. And I because of it, I feel like I'm healthier than I've ever been, because I'm able to not have to expend all that energy following not just the protocols of the business, but like all of the social dynamics of coworkers, and all of the rigidity that goes into being successful within the confines of somebody else's vision. And now I get to define what success is in the confines of my own vision. And I get to do that as me. And what's really great is that I get to show up as me every day. And if people don't want to work with me, or it's not a good fit, it's no problem.
Mm.
I get to show up as me, and most of the time I feel really well accepted as who I am. And that has been a validating experience that I've never had before in my whole life. I get to, for the first time, see what it's like to be unmasked and feel that validation.
Wow. I think that's powerful for a lot of people to hear, even to just sit with that for a moment, is that I had to be masked for so long. And I had to do that in order to follow this avenue of success, right? To be this version of success that actually didn't fit for me, didn't fit for my brain functioning, didn't fit for what felt good to me, didn't fit for what was inspiring to me. And I burn out, which is the story of many of us. I certainly have burnt out multiple times in my life as well. And I don't have to live that way anymore. I can live, lead, love unmasked.
Yeah, but I want to say, a couple things with that. First is I didn't know that I was masking for most of my life. I really just thought that was part of the human experience, that everybody was putting forth this much effort all of the time. And that really contributed to a lot of my like type A people pleasing perfectionist personality characteristics, because I never had that felt safety on a consistent basis. And so I was stuck in that masking so deep. I didn't know what I was doing was masking. And then I also want to note too that masking really is a privilege. And so, having the privilege to mask and to be able to have support within like the construct of my family and my immediate society and culture, or not culture, community, has given me the privilege to mask. Masking is not a privilege that everybody has. And so I definitely want to note that too, because that is something important to keep in mind when considering neurodivergence, is not everybody has the privilege to mask.
And I think there's different kinds of masking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because masking is also what Brene Brown would call armoring. Masking is also a defense mechanism, which is human. It's just human. It's innately human. If we're not feeling safe, our body is going to adapt, right? Like to try to help us defend, to try to help us stay safe and survive and navigate the terrain we're in that doesn't feel safe. Even though I'm so interested to hear your thoughts about this, especially as someone that explores and provides brain spotting, because I do as well, that we can feel unsafe and it has nothing to do. It doesn't have to have anything to do with our physical safety, which is what people's head often goes to, right? Like, oh, well, I'm not being abused or I'm not being, and that's not the only form. Like, that's not the only form of safety. If we're not feeling safe to use our own voice on a consistent basis for fear of deep rejection, if we're not feeling safe to simply be who we are for fear that we will be cast out or ridiculed or degraded or criticized, right? Like if we are not feeling safe to self-express, if we are not feeling safe to fail, we have to be successful. If that's happening on a chronic basis or an acute basis, then
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't feel safe in our psyche. It doesn't feel safe in our nervous system. It is encoded as a traumatic experience, and that affects us.
Well, and not only is it encoded, but I think we actually get addicted to it. And let me explain that a little bit, because when we start to experience things that don't feel safe for us, if we have these negative events, so I believe that emotions are energy in motion. And so when that energy comes into our system, if we don't have a way of processing it, it becomes stuck. And that energy creates these sensations or these somatic responses and an overactive mind, because it thinks that those things are still happening, those negative events are still happening. And so we start to produce brain chemicals that are keeping us stuck in that state of survival, whether it's fight flight or fawn freeze. We become stuck in that state of survival where we're constantly scanning the environment looking for things that might be unsafe, even when we are completely safe, even when there is nothing wrong. And so now our brain is actively searching for threat. And when that happens, we produce cortisol, and cortisol can be highly addictive. So over long periods of time, if we don't process those stuck emotions, then the more likely we are to be stuck in those chronic states with that cortisol pumping. And the more the cortisol is pumping, the more likely we are to get addicted to it. And this is all subconscious. We don't recognize that this is happening. And we actually can end up creating more stress in our life, trying to get more cortisol without even realize that we're doing it. And so that is one of the reasons why I love Brainspotting so much, is it gives us a way to get that, to dissipate that energy when it's become stuck.
Is that I love how you said that, because so I probably said my own version of that several times just in the past week with like clients that I've worked with. So I love hearing someone else say it. I agree. We think of, especially us high achieving folk, women in particular, can think of emotions like as frou-frou, or like we don't have time for that, or they just get in the way of the action that we need to take. And I 1,000% felt that way, right? Like the first couple decades of my life, right? Even though I knew I was going to be a therapist, I roll my eyes at like, don't ask me about my emotions. Like I'm doing stuff, right? Like I got to get stuff done kind of thing. But I'll hear about your emotions. It's just my emotions, right? That I'm the exception. It's my emotions that don't matter. That's very super healthy, Tony, right? Like had to learn the hard way. And I was skeptical when I came across brain spotting, because there was still a very large part of me that was in that place of like, this seems like there's it's not super tangible, right? Like I can't really,
Right.
and so I needed to try it myself deeply before ever being willing to utilize it with anyone that I work with. And I I love brain. I've been using it for years now, and I love brain spotting. I use it for myself. I use it with clients. I've even used it to help my kids get unstuck in some things.
Mhm.
But it is this different way of doing things, and we wouldn't be able to go all the way into brain spotting in this one podcast episode, but maybe in a different one we can go more into it. But the thing about brain spotting is that what it does is it takes a part of our vision, it has us focus in on a part of our visual field with our eyes, and then brings our awareness inward. And if you are anything like me, it sounds like maybe you had some similarities. Bringing my awareness inward was not part of my pursuit of success. Like it just was not. It didn't, it's not what I was taught. It's not what I was shown. In fact, in many ways, it was the opposite. There's like, no, you have to
Mhm.
keep planning these external goals. You have to keep pushing yourself outwardly rather than actually taking time for yourself inwardly and noticing how your body is and noticing what your emotions are. Like that just wasn't at all equated with success for me.
Yeah.
I really had to do a lot of healing. And I think healing is lifelong. So I'll always be doing some kind of healing or growing of some sort. But to help shift that for me, and I'm curious if that resonates, if that relates at all to some of your experience with your brain spotting journey as well.
Oh, definitely. I love brain spotting as well. I have been in my own brain spotting therapy, also use it with my kids and now as a graduate intern, and I'm all in with brain spotting. I actually happened upon it. I found a new counselor and he happened to do brain spotting. I had no idea what it was. And once I started, I just had this moment of, "Oh my god, this is my purpose in life." It was just this immediate connection, and I fell in love, like, as if it was a person. It was just it was I was all in. You know, for a long time in my trauma work, I as a, like, a really high achieving perfectionist person, my trauma work, I had to sit with all of that discomfort that I was all of that dissipated energy that needed to come out that was really stuck in there meant that it was going to be really uncomfortable for a while because now I had to feel all of that again.
Yeah.
And but I will say though that what I realized was it was not the purpose of it was never to help me learn how to live with the chronic stress and trauma. I already knew how to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I already knew how to live with all of that pain. I was doing it day in and day out. The purpose of this work was for me to learn how to live with the joy and the love and the peace and the forgiveness and the rest and all of those emotions because that's what I didn't know how to live with. I didn't know how to rest in the present moment with my kids. I didn't know how to experience joy with my family. I would go do these like joyful things, but I was never present for them. And it was because I was carrying around all that pain all of the time. And so, as hard as it was for me to go and do all of that work to dismantle the way that I've lived my life, my whole life, it also gave me back so much.
Oh my, that was so beautiful. And I can relate to that so much because it does get harder before it gets better, right? That's part of the healing process. And also, it allows for so much better. The joy, the peace, the rest that you talked about. And I love that you pulled parenting in because that's one of the pieces that we want to pull into this conversation today is okay, what does this have to do with how we show up as parents? What does it not have to do, right? With like how we show up as parents, because it can affect us in such a way where it is hard to be present with our kids. It is hard to enjoy joyful moments with our kids. It's hard to stop the
Yeah.
action, right? And be in the moment or be in the emotion or be with them in their emotion while they're
Mhm.
navigating things.
Yeah. No, I, you know, I work a lot with families that are trying to break these generational patterns and find this pathway for parenting that feels right for them. But that comes from healing these wounds. Because a lot of the times when we're triggered by our child's meltdown, or we're triggered by the whining, or we're triggered by whatever it is that they're doing, that trigger reflects an unhealed wound within ourselves. And so being able to be honest with ourselves and really turn towards that wound and that darkness a little bit can help us get through it to be able to come back into the light. But these things don't just get better on their own. You know, we can want to be a different parent. We can even work really hard to mask it. Like I did that for a long time too. I'm just gonna, put a gentle expression on my face and show up for this meltdown in the way that they need me to. But it doesn't matter because our mirror neurons are feeding off of each other. Our nervous systems are deeply intertwined. And so even if I try to pretend like everything's fine, they still feel that I'm not okay. And kids need to learn how to co-regulate with their caregivers before they can learn how to self-regulate. And so by deeply co-regulating with them, they actually become more independent and self-regulatory by having that healthy, safe connection. And that wasn't something I could provide until I went and healed my own wounds that were showing up and preventing me from doing that.
And I wanted to highlight the kind of the statement that seems like an oxymoron, which is that our children, in order to be able to self-regulate in a healthy way, actually need to be able to co-regulate in a safe way.
Absolutely. They cannot learn self-regulation without co-regulation. They have to learn fully feel co-regulated before they will ever be able to self-regulate
in a safe and healthy way. And that is hard to wrap our heads around too, which we probably won't have time to go all the way into today either. But if we can shift our focus of being like a successful woman, a successful professional, a successful mom or parent, from really focusing on the do, go, control, right? If we can shift that and redefine it in such a way that allows us to embrace that joy that you're talking about, the rest, the peacefulness, our neurodivergence, our difference, our uniqueness, the variety that is us that we bring to the table. If we're willing to slow down to explore that and to heal some of the wounds that all of us have in some way, shape, or form on a spectrum, that changes everything.
Yeah. It really truly does. But I also want to pull this back though to talk about privilege again, though, because this work is a privilege. Being able to, do trauma work, being able to have respite care for your children, especially if your child doesn't function well in the public schools and you have them home full time because of their nervous system disability, and you don't have any care and support. We don't live in these societies where there's a village anymore. We don't live close to family. We don't have these communities where everybody's helping each other. And then when you have to work 2 or 3 jobs and you have to, 2 parents who are working more than full time or just full time, it's not always accessible, and it's not always something that is feasible for families. And so I just want to bring back into our awareness how much being able to do this is a privilege, because it's just not something that everybody has access to.
And I think, viewing it through that societal lens, that privilege lens, right, that you just offered us, is one way for us to just become aware of the different resources and supports that we may or may not have access to in this season or in the next, because it does change season to season, right? So I'm pregnant with my 5th right now at the time of this recording, right? Doing a couple months. The support that I have access to now is different than when I was a single mom with my first 14 years ago.
Yeah.
And I don't want to make that bad or wrong or right or wrong or anything like that. But to be aware of that and for me to reflect on that has been helpful in my own healing journey and my own growth journey, and also in helping me appreciate the resources and supports that I do have now that I didn't once have, and the ones that I got really creative
Yeah, for sure.
back then,
Mm,
that because it was just a different season. No
yeah.
worries. You know, and I hope that that can speak some hope and encouragement to wherever we all, any of us are at on our journeys, is that maybe there are some supports or resources that we don't have access to right now. It doesn't mean it's going to be that way forever. And also, at some point, we have to bring our awareness to what is within our control so that we can just a little bit
Yeah.
start to move in some kind of direction. Even though I was a therapist at the time, I was still adverse to going to see a therapist because the story I told myself was no one really cares. They're not going to understand anyway. And it's not going to be helpful. They're just going to tell me what I already know. Like these were the stories I told myself, right? And it was tight for me there were times when I could not afford to attend therapy, and there were times when it
Uh-huh.
was very tight. But when I fully committed to go, it I felt this shift because the person I wound up working with had this nurturing maternal part of her that I did not even know I needed to experience in order to heal some of the pains that I was holding on to,
Yeah.
right? And that that wasn't like a support that was always available to me, and it wasn't one I was always open to.
Sure. Yeah.
It's also I'm not the same one that I use now. Like I don't use that same support now. Do you know what I mean? So I I,
Yeah.
I share this just to say that yes, we all have different privileges, and yes, we need to honor that. And also at some point for ourselves, if we want to not
Yeah.
feel so stuck, we have to start somewhere, right? It's just somewhere. And it might be
Oh,
in our closet with a book, right? Like it might be 5 minutes in our closet or in the bathroom with a
or
book, right? Like,
yeah. Well, and there's this quote by Richard Rohr, I think, and he says, we don't live ourselves, or we don't think ourselves into living, we live ourselves into thinking. And so I have really recognized that in my own trauma healing. It's not like these huge shifts that I had where like I left my brain spotting session one day and like my whole world just changed. No, it was piece by piece removing these blocks, and that would show up in little bits throughout the day. That would show up in me saying, you know what? I am going to take my lunch break today. I'm not going to work through my lunch break because I deserve to have rest. And I'm going to go sit out on the back porch and let the sun, shine on my face for an hour. And I deserve to have this peace, this rest. And so it showed up in small changes of my behavior that were not huge. They weren't monumental, but they were step by step helping me to shift that survival state. When I was constantly scanning the environment for threat, the more often I did things that were not reflecting threat, because if I was held up in an alley with a gun at gunpoint, I wouldn't be letting the sun shine on my face with my eyes closed. I wouldn't be humming while I do the dishes. I wouldn't be turning on a song and dancing with my kids in the living room. Like none of those things, I wouldn't be doing them if I was under threat. And so little by little, I'm reincorporating those little things into my day that are helping my brain receive that message. Okay, we're safe. Okay, we're safe. Okay, we're safe, over and over and over again. And that takes a lot of time because it took a lot of time to get into the survival mode.
Yep, because we were wired in one way, right? And we're rewiring in a different way. There were so many
Yeah,
golden nuggets in what you just shared, because I think that's another opportunity for us to challenge the conventional definition of success, that it has to be these big, monumental, actionable things that everyone can see, that can be documented, that can be quantified, that can be rewarded, that but there's so much power in those subtle things, is what I'm hearing you say. Like those subtle, still, silent moments, those subtle, active moments, those subtle, smaller moments that are day to day, they make up the most of our lives.
they do. Yeah. And when I was in the height of my survival state, I couldn't see that. I completely rejected that idea. Like, that sounds really dumb, that sitting outside for lunch is going to change my mental health. It's like nothing's going to fix anything. That is so small, it doesn't matter. Like, I believed that unless I did something huge, nothing was ever going to change. And it was actually not the huge stuff that had the most impact. It was the monotonous stuff, the day after day stuff, the showing up for myself. In my own therapy once, my therapist asked me, "Do you ever just ask yourself if you feel worthy?" And I was like, "No, who does that? Who asks themselves that? That's no." But it stuck with me. And so then, you know, day by day I would ask myself, "Am I worthy of this boundary? Am I worthy of this break? Am I worthy of this joy? Am I worthy of this time?" And then it wasn't about creating all of these like routines and structures into my day because I needed more discipline. It wasn't about the rigidity. It was, now I'm going to choose to do these things because I'm going to choose that I'm worth it. And my narrative shift happened. And that was, I think, one of the most important parts for me because it took shame out of it. Because, I'd wake up in the morning and I'm going to work out today and I'm going to do this for myself and that. And when it wouldn't happen, well, cue the guilt and the shame. But now when I'm making decisions, it's based off of a new narrative. Am I worth taking this time? Am I worth prioritizing myself? And if the answer is yes, then I'm going to do it. And it's a lot easier to do it with that mindset shift.
And you have this, it's not like, so when people hear narrative, I think often they just go back to thoughts, right? Okay, so it's just you're changing your mental story, but it's deeper than that.
More than that.
Right? Like it's the emotional connection to the narrative, and it's the relational context that can happen if we allow it, for us to experience shifts in our relationship. So I have become a very deep believer that if there was pain and trauma and wounding that happened within relationships, then it is a required part at some point in the healing journey to have reparative relational experiences. It doesn't have to be with the same person, although it could be, that you had the pain with. But that relational component, since we're a social and emotional species, helps us to not just try to think ourselves out of it, because it doesn't work. Right? But it marries it all together. And the science, the psychology, and soul is what I like to say. Like, it marries it all together. Isn't it so powerful?
Yeah. Yeah. For me, a lot of it came from doing that inner child work and piece by piece, learning how to show up for myself as a loving parent and not a critical parent. Because that critical parent was constantly had that voice in my head that it was, all shame, all guilt. You need to get better. You need to do better. You need to, like, all of these needs and shoulds. And it was all about outward success and keeping up that appearance. Whereas little by little, and this was not like an overnight, I'm going to start showing up as a loving parent to myself. But this was a practice of constantly working with my inner child and inner teenager and reparenting myself in a loving way. so that when those things show up in my life, that critical parent isn't the default anymore. Sometimes it still is, but not as often as it used to be. And I can kind of catch it now when that critical parent does show up. I can be like, whoa, where can I bring some compassion into this? Because I am a human being and I'm going to make mistakes.
Absolutely. Having it be a practice, another shift, right? From getting it done, marking it off the list, that conventional definition of success that so many of us have strived towards, to allowing it to be a journey, allowing it to be a practice, allowing it to be ongoing. And that can be really difficult. But, there's so many nuances and layers and poignant statements throughout this one conversation that we just had. I think it'd be helpful to go back and probably just listen to it again and again and pull out pieces, over time that really resonate with me. And maybe that's helpful to someone else that's listening in too. But there's so much here. And I really appreciate that you were willing to share your professional experience and also your personal wisdom with us, with all of these nuances and all of these pieces. So thank you so much for being with us, Michelle. And what I would like to do is ask you one last question. And there's no right or wrong answer, just your answer. I also ask everyone this question. So looking back on this conversation and, just your overall reflections of your life experience, how would you say you have redefined success for yourself in your life now?
Yeah, I think really within just the context of this conversation is I've redefined it with authenticity. I've been able to redefine success in a way that works for me rather than against me. And that has been such a profound shift in not only my nervous system safety, but my relationships, my mental health. Being able to live authentically is something that everybody deserves. Nobody should have to change who they are as a person in order to thrive in this world. And so I hope that we can continue to advocate for societal structures that level that playing field so that we can keep more divergent neurotypes in mind and have accessibility for everybody to live in a way that they can still be authentic to themselves.
I love it. I love it. To honor variety and diversity so that we can self-express authentically, and how that actually promotes more unity
Absolutely.
and wholeness and healing. So beautiful. Michelle, folks that want to just see what you're up to, follow your work, see what you're doing, where could they find you? Is there a place they could connect with you or follow you on social media or something like that?
Yeah, I'm on social media. I also have a website. It's strengthscenteredcoaching.com. If they're here in Texas, I am counseling intern at Better Health, not Better Help, Better Health here in Texas, virtual and in person in Hutto. And yeah, I would love to hear from you. I don't keep up with my social media as much as I used to, but certainly follow me and maybe that will change one day.
It's all a journey. It's all a journey, right? Ebb and flow, ebb and flow. Everyone that has tuned in with us, thank you so much for being with us today. Wasn't Michelle just amazing? Like, this conversation was exactly what I was needing to dive into and continue to explore. And I hope that there was at least one, if not more, nuggets in there that also did the same for you, that maybe challenged you or helped you grow in some way. If you're joining us on YouTube, go ahead, look below, join the comment section, add your questions, add your contributions. We want to cultivate a space here that allows folks to have a safe community where we can grow and connect and support one another. And until next time, may you all experience success that benefits you, feels really good to you in a healthy way, and then ripples out and makes positive effects in this world. Bye, everyone. Links related to this episode can be found in the show notes section. Want to submit questions about success, satisfaction, healing, and relationships, health, or work, you can do that free and anonymous at drtonywarner.com, where you'll find other resources there as well. Did you benefit from this episode? You can subscribe, like, and share with another to pass it on, because anyone can listen on the go with this podcast audio available on all major podcasting platforms.